We have reports this afternoon that the Big Ten is nearing a private equity deal that would. This is the beginning of privatizing college football, which I think is a step in the right direction. I'll try and break this down in ways that hopefully is easy to understand because I think this is a pretty big deal. So the Big Ten, this is just for them specifically up to this point, but I do believe the rest of the country will follow suit if this goes through. They're closing on a capital deal that will inject more than $2 billion, billion with a B, into the Big Ten schools. And it would create a new entity called the Big Ten Enterprises, which would hold the league's media rights and sponsorship deals. And now this ownership is split among every school, the Big Ten office, and the investment arm that is doing this. And there's a pension fund that will have a stake, but not any operational control, that's just how the investing works. And each school is going to get a payout in the range of 9 figures. Now, obviously, bigger brands are going to receive more than the smaller ones, though the gap is very modest and in theory like less than a percentage point. So Maryland and Ohio State are going to be paid very similar massive sums of money from what this deal would do. And it would also extend the conference's grant of rights through 2046, which increases the stability, deters schools from leaving, and really starts to attack the idea of a super conference. Right, like what we were worried about with some of the SEC and Big Ten schools, maybe like a Clemson and a Miami also joining into like a super league. But so privatizing would really take that threat away. The motivations for this are obviously they're financial, because a lot of these schools are facing lots of debt and rising costs because of whether it's NIL, new facilities, upgrades to your coaching staff, to your roster, all of that. So naturally speaking, financially, this is a big step up for people. And there's obviously also skeptics. And the biggest one is, bigger schools worried about it because Michigan doesn't want Maryland making the same amount of money that they do because it threatens their dominance of the conference. Ohio State and Purdue. Ohio State does not want any part of Purdue making as much money as them because it is a direct threat to their dominance in the conference. So, obviously there are pros and cons, and no one is surprised that the big schools will be against the negative schools. I think that privatizing college football is absolutely where this sport has to go, given where we are. Because right now it is such a free-for-all in just about every aspect. Right, and the conference realignment is probably the thing that people have the most problems with, right? Because you're losing geographical rivalries, with the expansion of leagues, and you're losing divisions. Like, let's take Florida, for example. They're no longer playing Tennessee and LSU every year. Like, it's just things like that where people generally believe the sport is going in the wrong direction, and you're losing a lot of what makes college football so special. Privatizing the sport puts a stop to that pretty abruptly, right? And it is a direct benefit to every school where this is happening. Because, Northwestern cannot compete right now. They just can't. Sure, they're in the Big Ten. They have the logo on the side of their helmet. They can't compete right now. What this would do is give them the chance to compete with the right coach, because then all of a sudden financially, you're not anywhere near as behind the big schools as you are right now. So let me just bring this to the SEC. Right, Kentucky's kind of dead in the water. If Kentucky starts making as much money as Georgia does for their facilities, for their NIL fund, for their head coaching fund, that is going to help level the playing field. It's going to give Kentucky the chance to compete in the SEC where they really haven't competed in a very long time. Now, obviously, a Georgia, a Texas, an Alabama, they're not going to want Kentucky and Arkansas to make as much money as they're making. But for the betterment of the sport, right, you can't keep catering to the top schools in each conference because you get rid of the parity. The SEC is so fun this year already because you're seeing that gap is already gone. Now, imagine if that gap between the top and the bottom was gone everywhere else. Imagine if we got to see Northwestern beating Ohio State because they were given, equal financial possibilities. That was said weird, but you know what I mean. And it truly became not about which schools had the best resources, but it was which programs had the best coaching staff and talent to go out there and win football games. With the Big Ten doing this, the SEC, if the Big Ten is already closing on a deal, I promise you the SEC and the other conferences have already had these discussions. Right, they've already talked about the possibility of it. I'm sure they have some candidates for investments. If the Big Ten goes through with this, I think it's going to be a very, very rapid domino effect to where every conference begins to push for a privatized model. It's going to balance out the playing field. It's going to make it so every team truly has the same opportunities, and we'll get to see who is truly the best at football and not just the best at spending money on football is. Because right now the teams at the top, you got to give credit to their coaches and their players for being good at their jobs. But those schools have those guys because they have the ability to spend the most money. When the college football becomes who the best coaches and players are and not just which school can pay the best, that is the beauty of college football. That is when the sport is at its peak. when it's not who's the best at spending money, but it's who's the best at using it. So I think that privatizing college football is absolutely is the best thing for the sport. I really do. So hopefully this is a domino effect that we'll see start to unfold, and every conference will follow suit.